Chigiri's awakening is one of the most beloved scenes in Blue Lock. After seemingly having lost his dream, his future, everything by which he defined himself, Chigiri realizes just giving up won't make him happy, and that the only thing he has to lose are his chains. For many fans, the moment of Chigiri blazing across the battlefield, rekindling his dream one final time, is a profoundly inspiring moment. Yet, to me, this scene always had a heartbreaking tinge to it, and that stems from one specific line of dialogue. It's from the part where Chigiri realizes what's truly important to him, namely, the joy of breaking past people. But look at the specific wording here. The only time I can believe in myself is the moment I break past someone. Or, to put it a bit more generally, I can only love myself when I succeed. Chigiri's storyline in the first selection revolves around his misconceptions about talent, that the chosen few invariably lord over the huddled masses, and about how his entire self-worth was intimately linked to his perceived talents. So, when these talents were eventually stripped away from him, he struggles to define what value his existence still holds, not just as a striker, but also, I suspect, as a person. So, let me propose some answers here, based on everything the manga has shown us. What value does Hyouma Chigiri still have? Why is he still worthy of love if he can't become the world's best striker? For one, Chigiri is one of the kindest people in all of Blue Lock. He's an incredibly loyal friend who forms deep personal relationships with his peers in a heartbeat, but also someone who offers unconditional support to people he barely knows. Furthermore, he's perceptive, articulate, intelligent, and in addition, he seems to be part of a warm, loving family. Yet, none of this seems to matter to Chigiri as he stokes his flames in a last-ditch effort to make a difference. In the end, Chigiri simply reasserted his self-esteem by proving that he's still an amazing footballer. His sense of self remains fundamentally tied to his athletic accomplishments, and to me, that feels really sad. Yes, he's been reborn from the ashes, but the lesson he internalized from his big scene is still that he can believe in himself because of his feats on the pitch. And were he to sustain another injury, well, nothing would have really changed now, would it? He'd still grapple with the same issues of self-worth and struggle to find a place and purpose for himself in the world. And his experiences in Blue Lock have not helped him at all in this regard. And I think this has been flagged very deliberately for someone whose expiration date inches ever further forward. But let me zoom out for a bit. When I first got into Blue Lock, I, like many others, was intrigued by the premise of turning a mild-mannered teenager into a raving football sociopath. And yet, the early parts of the manga gave me the impression that its central conceit, being that football, and by implication society at large, would improve if everyone gave in to their selfish desires, was rather immature, something I couldn't really take seriously as a social critique. But as the story progressed, it dawned on me that this edgy football comic is actually deeply concerned with the shadowy side of its own premise. That Blue Lock constantly explores the repercussions of subscribing to a philosophy of meritocratic individualism. To me, this elevates Blue Lock from an adrenaline-fueled action spectacle to a truly profound exploration of the human condition, and that's in the context of a story that very much espouses a kind of Sigma male grindset mentality. It still constantly brings up the toll of this mindset on its cast's mental well-being. This is something I find truly extraordinary, and yet I get the impression that this aspect of Blue Lock's writing is woefully underappreciated in fan discourse. So that's something I want to set straight in this video, and also I just want to gush about one of my favourite aspects of this story. Hello, my name is Sean, and if you want to take away just one lesson from Blue Lock, let it be this one. Also, if you would like to help support the channel and fund the amazing artwork I've been able to commission recently, please consider subscribing to my Patreon. Also, if this sweetens the deal, my patrons also get access to a weekly podcast where I set out my first thoughts on the latest Blue Lock chapters. So anyways, Chigiri is probably the first character where the manga hints at the negative consequences of marrying your self-esteem to your success in a particular domain. That's of course not to say that you shouldn't be ambitious and aspire to achieve amazing things. But if the only conception of yourself is being something like the world's greatest striker, you're in for a rude awakening if that rug gets pulled out from underneath your feet. So that brings me to one of the characters most strongly associated with issues of mental well-being. Shouei Barou is introduced as the paradigm of patriarchal masculinity within the Blue Lock program. The ultimate alpha male who was immediately hailed as a king for his brute strength and domineering personality. Also, he's the series' first depiction of what a true egoist striker, the ideal our cast is striving to embody, might look like. And from that perspective, it's really notable that the ideal of kingship that Barou pursues is explicitly gendered. In short, Barou is the figure that is used to explore the psychological harm that can arise from the more toxic strands of masculinity. What I think is captured really well as we dive further into the depths of Barou's character is just how vulnerable you truly become if all you strive for is to be the king of the hill. During Barou's youth, he constantly witnessed the gulf in abilities between himself and his peers, leading him to the belief that he's destined to be the top dog. And that locks him into an eternal siege mentality against any perceived claimants to his throne. In a patriarchal paradigm, one's masculinity is under constant threat and needs to be reasserted over and over again. One misstep, one blunder, and that's it. Now you're a beta, a girl, a gay, or whatever else might be imagined as the antithesis to the manly man. That explains why Barou completely spirals when his status as king of the field is challenged, why he deems his life effectively forfeit after submitting to Isagi. All that is to say, Barou's character had already been used to highlight the destructive consequences of valuing yourself purely for your athletic abilities before the start of the NEL. And that's why his dynamic with Marc Snuffy carries such weight right off the bat. In fact, the page revealing what drove Snuffy to treat football as nothing more than a job is so impactful to me, not because of the revelation of Mick's fate, but rather from seeing Barou, after all his pushback against Snuffy's philosophy, stunned to silence, with a look suggesting that he's experiencing a profound moment of introspection. And knowing what we've learned about this figure so far, that all he values is his ability to reach the top, we intuitively understand that Snuffy's words ring true. Barou indeed sees himself as a star athlete first and a human second, and at last the manga explicitly spells out the consequences of not learning to love yourself as a person. And circling back to the start of this video for a moment, I find it extremely interesting that Snuffy also makes direct reference to the risk of sustaining a career and an injury. All I'll say is that this story has clearly not forgotten that it has set up a main character whose experiences are fundamentally shaped by such an injury, and I think it's deeply significant that his situation is recalled by someone who carries the scars of learning to value life too late. Anyways, back to Barou. What gives his storyline in the Ubers match such a whiff of tragedy is the sheer sense of inevitability surrounding his ultimate decision to cast aside Snuffy's teachings. It's clear from the get-go that a philosophy like Snuffy's would never be acceptable to Blue Lock's top egoists, no matter its merits if approached objectively. Now, I think this would ring true for each of Blue Lock's major strikers. I can't imagine the likes of Isagi, Bachira, Rin, Shido or Nagi consigning themselves to Snuffy's tactics either. But Barou's character definitely lends itself best as a point of contrast. Not just for his established mental shortcomings, but also because he most closely fits the bill of archetypically egotistical striker. Yet perhaps even more importantly, Barou is the character who is most overtly used to communicate one of Blue Lock's core ideas, that you must suffer the humiliation of defeat and etch it deep into your soul before you can truly strive for the top. This lesson is reiterated time and again throughout the manga, from Nagi to Chigiri to Kaiser to Isagi, as recent chapters have reminded us. In fact, there's a Nagi quote from the second selection that really gets to the heart of the matter. Even though Barou has experienced a string of defeats already, that's not enough. He must fully succumb to despair before he can grow. Also, just as an aside, I love it so much that this moment comes full circle in the NEL, where Barou is now the one to tell Nagi that he must accept defeat and undergo a figurative death in turn. So, when Barou in the Ubers match cites the lack of despair as his reason for rejecting Snuffy's approach, he isn't simply expressing a mindset that's specific to his character. Rather, the narrative of Blue Lock presents it as an inevitable reality that anyone who wants to make it on the top stage will be battered, bruised, and broken countless times, and that invariably not everyone will recover from this experience. With all this in mind, I strongly suspect that Blue Lock will return to this issue sometime down the line. Barou, closely echoing Mick's words, is a Chekhov's gun that's just waiting to be fired off in one way, shape or form, and only time will tell if he's learned to love himself regardless of his athletic abilities. That brings me to someone who's in dire need of therapy even for Blue Lock standards. I know I've already harped on for quite a while about how Snuffy's admonition that you need to love yourself as a person rather than for your talents has ramifications for not just the immediate context with Barou, but also for Blue Lock as a whole. And if there's one character who truly exemplifies this, it's Michael Kaiser. You probably won't need to be reminded of this, but Kaiser grew up with a single parent who didn't treat him as a human being. Someone who called him a piece of shit instead of saying, "I love you." And unsurprisingly, the young child took this lesson to heart and came to believe that he was indeed mere trash, unworthy of love. Now, in Kaiser's childhood fantasies, he assumed that leaving his abusive environment would also transform him from something lower than filth into a real human. Read, into someone who can be loved. That's the big revelation from Kaiser's PXG goal, that at least in his view, humanity and being worthy of love are basically identical. Human beings deserve love, pieces of shit don't. As it turns out, however, that was hopelessly naive. Escaping his physical confines proves much easier than undoing the psychological damage from his inhumane upbringing. Even when he arrives in Bastard München, he instinctively feels that he can't lay claim to the same humanity as others, meaning that he doesn't have the same right to be loved. And so, Kaiser goes out of his way to prove his existence, his humanity, to the world around him. In essence, he hopes that putting his mark on his rivals will lead him to be acknowledged as a human being. Yet, Kaiser's frame of reference for people who made an impact on his life is very limited, and so the only way he knows to prove his existence is by tormenting others, with every person he crushed making him feel ever the more human. But this is where Snuffy's teachings once again kick in. If Kaiser derived his humanity from his ability to agonize others, that's just a different way of saying that he values himself solely for his talents. And yeah, once Kaiser's position as head of the team is stolen away from him, his humanity slips through his fingers as well. And so, he returns to being an unwanted piece of filth once more. However, in the world of professional football, suffering defeat is an inevitability, a prerequisite if you want to reach the top. So, Kaiser might have wanted to settle in comfortably on his throne, but as Blue Lock sets out very clearly, that top simply can't be reached without enduring the soul-crushing grip of despair. And you must be prepared to confront your own weaknesses and insecurities to overcome it. So, where does that leave Kaiser as of now? In my view, he slowly turned towards the right path, but hasn't quite reached the correct answer. The Kaiser at the start of the NEL, at least as how I see it, held two closely intertwined, misguided beliefs. Firstly, as I already discussed, that his status as a human being depends on his success. And secondly, that his success is defined by his ability to inflict pain on others. So, viewed from this perspective, his big moment of awakening during the PXG match planted the seeds to challenge his second misconception. In actuality, Kaiser yearns to be human because he deeply longs for love. Now, I don't mean to imply that he's fully understood the implications of his true desire yet. After all, the very next thing he does is discard Ness, thereby regaining a shred of perceived humanity by sinking another soul into despair. Nevertheless, this contradiction is bubbling very closely to the surface by this point. When Kaiser talks about a yearning for love as a zero state, while also describing how he can only live by hurting others, the internal tensions are through the roof, right? To me, it feels like he could come to the realization that malice isn't the answer with just one solid poke at his beliefs. And this is something that I see as very likely happening by the end of the NEL. Of course, viewers from the distant future of 2025 are more than welcome to rub it in my face if I was wrong here. But all that being said, Kaiser leaving behind his malice doesn't solve the bigger issue. Namely, that he's still tying his self-worth, his humanity, to his success, regardless of whether that success is defined by hatred or by love. When Kaiser comes to understand that he can't retain his perceived humanity if he merely seeks to maintain his present status, his solution is to cast that humanity aside altogether, to return to being a piece of shit, someone who isn't worthy of love without accomplishments. And as long as Kaiser holds on to that deep-grained belief, he'll never truly be able to love himself as a person. And as Snuffy's story has shown, that will eventually come back to bite you. So let me zoom out a bit. I know I've been talking about the specific storylines of Chigiri, of Snuffy, of Barou, of Kaiser, but my main purpose in this video isn't really to provide deeper insight into their characters, although that's an added benefit of course. Instead, what I hope to have convinced you of is that these specific character arcs are indicative of Blue Lock's broader thematic concerns. Namely, that Blue Lock has a sustained interest in questions of self-love, which is explored at various story junctions, and that it conceives of this as a core tenet within its philosophy of egotism. To put it simply, the story makes it crystal clear that an egoist striker will inevitably find themselves dragged down into the pits of despair, and so they must find ways to love themselves even in times of failure if they want to keep rising to the challenge. Now, I've talked a lot about how Blue Lock sets out the psychological perils of not loving yourself, but not really about the flip side. How do you go about cultivating enough self-love to tread such a terrifying path? To find some answers, I want to turn to Bachira's storyline. As I see it, there's a major paradox to his character during the early parts of the story. On the surface, Bachira appears to be one of the most free-spirited, uninhibited Blue Lock candidates. Yet, as we delve into his inner turmoil, we discover that he's deeply preoccupied by what others think of him. Just look at what happens as soon as he's called weird. Bachira's switch is completely flipped as he tries to deny the allegations. And despite his mom assuaging his fears, the young boy seeks affirmation for a second, for a third time. Even years later, these are the terms in which he couches his deepest concern, that there is something wrong with him, that he's somehow different from other people. When I was rereading this section of the manga for this video, it struck me how much of Bachira's story revolves around his struggle to accept himself in an environment that systematically denies people who don't conform to social norms. This here is not the behaviour of someone who's okay with being different, who has learned to love himself in spite of constant societal rejection. Just look at the way how Bachira frets about his coaches and teammates losing touch with their inner monster. That thought gets him truly worried, disheartened. After all, if everyone around him grows up, he'll become even more of an outcast than he already is. Perhaps the main reason why I love this backstory so much is the honesty in which it approaches issues of self-esteem and self-love. Our media oftentimes propagates individualistic messages about being yourself, following your passions. If you want to be happy, just be who you are. Don't rely on the approval of others. That kind of stuff. But that isn't quite true, is it? In reality, Blue Lock tells us, those who wholeheartedly follow their own desires, without regard for those around them, will end up kicking footballs against a bridge, completely alone, as their all-consuming passion slowly morphs into a monster that shackles them and erodes all the joy they used to experience. Just look at this absolute emotional sledgehammer of a page. We're told that Bachira is the only one who kept believing in the fun of the sport. And then, the manga confronts us with the natural outcome of doing so. Bachira's desire to stay true to his childhood passion has effectively sapped away every drop of joy, and consigned him to wither away in isolation under the haunting auspices of his inner demon. This idea has been generalized in recent chapters, when Ego discusses the genius-talented learner dichotomy. People who see the world in a different light from those around them will get shunned, mocked, and ostracized, and they will only find acceptance if their genius is discovered by someone who can communicate its value to the world. What I really like about this framework is that it offers a tangible answer to Bachira's character needs. A lesser writer creating a story like Blue Lock might simply advocate for stepping even harder on the egotism pedal. Someone like Bachira should just start caring even less about the thoughts and feelings of others, impose their will upon the world until they have molded it in their image, and eventually that will make them confident and happy. Ironically enough, this is effectively the conclusion Bachira lands on during his moment of awakening, that he must cast aside all the connections he's made in favour of his original impulses. But that isn't really the correct answer, is it? As we've already seen, this uncompromising pursuit of your passions will invariably lead to sorrow, loneliness, and isolation. And that's what makes Bachira's awakening such a profoundly sad moment. Instead, the answer Blue Lock seems to land on is that you can only actualize your true desires and come to love yourself in the process by forging connections with those around you. To take Bachira as an example again, he only came into his own once he encountered someone who truly values his desires and talents, because Isagi was willing to enter his lonely world. That's of course not to say that Bachira is utterly reliant on Isagi, but the reality is that he could only come to accept himself because of his friendship with Isagi. And to me at least, that's not a sign of weakness, but something truly beautiful. As I said towards the start of the video, my biggest surprise during my journey through Blue Lock is seeing just how much heart there is to be found in a comic that on its surface seems to be about turning pure-hearted boys into egotistical douchebags. Despite what it says on the tin, Blue Lock is not a story about trampling on those around you for your own benefit or satisfaction. And while some of its dynamics are clearly warped or dysfunctional, the manga always shows its egoists getting stronger and gradually overcoming their shortcomings and traumas by forging relations with other people. So, that's it on my end. As a heads up, I'll be taking a bit of a break from YouTube over the holidays to spend time with my loved ones, so my next video will probably be coming out in about 4 or 5 weeks. And talking about the holidays, I know that this period isn't a joyful occasion for everyone out there. It won't be the easiest for my family this year at least. So, just in case you need to hear this, I love you, whoever you are. I said I'll be taking a break, but I will make sure to put out my Patreon podcast every week to discuss the new Blue Lock chapters. So, if you're interested in that, do consider joining. Your support really does help out the channel tremendously. And in particular, I want to shout out my €10 patrons for their generous support. Patricia and Pat, Orangey Legend, and Trishula the Best Boy. So, until next time, Slán go fóill.